Sunny and Jet stood side by side, observing the magnificent plaza with incredulous expressions. The shades had retreated to form a defensive formation around the dark castle, and the vast open expanse around them was littered with gorgeous men and women who lay on the cold stone, quick asleep. There was no sign of the recent devastation left anywhere in sight, and none of the sleeping youths bore even a single wound. It seemed as if they were fairies who had simply fallen asleep after making merry throughout the night. Sunny had deactivated the 5 links of the curse, for now, so that its passive enchantment could do its work. The enhanced the rate with which his shades were mended by his soul, and since quite a number of them had been vanquished in the battle, he needed to get them back as soon as possible. Jet remained silent for a while, then cast a sideways glance at Nightmare, who stood nearby. Her expression was neutral. "L rode atop that thing, huh?" Sunny shrugged. "Sure. He's a horse, though. So why not?" Nightmare snorted in response and raised his head a little. Jet stared at Sunny for a moment. "A horse. I see, he's a horse. How did you get this kind of horse, anyway?" He scratched the tip of his nose. "Well, funnily enough, made a deal with the insane immortal to spend a night in a creepy castle. To fix my broken heart. That's how Nightmare and I first met." Jet blinked a couple of times, prompting him to smile faintly. "One thing led to another. And I killed him. And now, he's my horse." She inhaled deeply, then shook her head and glanced away. "Elle already thought so after Godgrave, but your horse is terrifying." "I guess it makes sense, though. Who else would use a transcendent terror as a steed if not the Lord of Shadows?" Sunny chuckled. "Says the dead woman who sails around on a living ship made by a demon from a heart god's branch. And I'd imagine that countless people would, it's just that few people can." In truth, he was not in the mood for jokes. Sunny was not particularly tired, but defeating these immortal abominations had not lessened his apprehension one bit. This battle was merely a prelude to the true hardship. Now that they had established a foothold in the Eternal City, the actual conquest would soon begin. Jet studied the sleeping immortals. "So, what do we do with them now? I don't suppose we can just leave them to nap here?" Sunny was asking himself the same question, as well. He hesitated for a few moments, then commanded Mimic to open its gates. As the colossal gates began to move, the shades did, as well. Picking up the motionless bodies of the immortals, they turned back and carried them into the great dark maw of the marvelous Mimic. Jet observed them with a dubious expression. "Are you sure that this is a good idea?" Sunny hesitated. He was not trying to feed the immortals to Mimic, merely store them in its spacious halls. Still, it could prove perilous if Nightmare failed to keep the abominations asleep. They would wake up inside the dark castle, giving it the worst case of indigestion in history. Not to mention opening Sunny to a deadly attack from the rear. It also prevented him from dismissing Mimic, since doing so would carry the sleeping immortal straight to the lightless depths of his souls. Sunny did not know what would happen then, and wasn't particularly interested in finding out. He sighed. "Lamb, not sure. However, this is the best terrible idea I've got. It is safer than leaving them in the open, at least." Jet contemplated for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, if you say so." While the shades carried the grotesque creatures inside, Sunny and Jet spent some time examining their sleeping enemies. He attempted to carry one into the Shadow Realm, and just as expected felt a powerful sorcery preventing the immortal from leaving the boundary of the Eternal City. Dayron would not have left any loopholes, I bet. Jet had been studying the immortals as well, in the meantime. Chapters first released on nofire.net. After a while, she frowned. Noticing her troubled expression, Sunny asked, "Did you discover something?" She remained silent for a few moments. "They don't have soul cores." He tilted his head a little. Indeed, 2639 Deep Sleep. Sunny himself had noted that the vile darkness hiding in the souls of the corrupted immortals did not have the usual nodes. However, he had no idea what that meant, or rather, too many ideas to consider any one seriously. "What do you think that means?" Perhaps Jet could come up with a good theory. She did not answer immediately, looking at the sleeping immortal with a concerned expression. Then, she asked him an unexpected question, "Sonny, do you know when a mushroom dies?" He blinked a few times. What kind of question is that? The question seemed preposterous. But, of course, his flaw forced him to give an honest answer. And that, in turn, forced him to consider the question seriously. When he did, he realized that he did not really know. No idea, actually. When it's harvested, no. When it's cooked. When it's eaten? Jet glanced back at the immortal. Those are all good answers. But actually, mushrooms never really die, because they're never really alive, to begin with, not in our understanding, at least. Because mushrooms are not organisms, they're merely organs. The real organism is the mycelium that is hidden underground, so when we're picking mushrooms, we're just taking its fruit. You can say that a tree died, but you wouldn't say that an apple did, would you? Sonny stared at her with a peculiar expression. I guess not. But, Jet, are you all right? Is the lack of oxygen getting to your brain, perhaps? Why the hell are you telling me this? Actually, he already had an idea of what she was trying to say. He did not like the implications, though. Jet sighed. This is the impression I get from these abominations. That they're not really abominations, just little parts of a far larger one. That would explain why they don't have soul cores, because there are no souls in their bodies, just fragments of a soul. Sonny remained silent for a long while before answering. First of all, can we move on from the mushroom metaphor, please? It's giving me the creeps. He grimaced and then added reluctantly, so, anyway. If these are merely mushroom fruit, then where's the mushroom tree? Instead of answering, Jet simply turned to the center of the Eternal City. There, a colossal structure towered above the radiant spires. The structure at the heart of the Eternal City resembled a soaring, monolithic palace with sharp spires piercing the darkness of the underwater chasm. These spires, however, did not emanate radiant silver light. Instead, they were black and lifeless, making the palace seem like a jagged mass of darkness. There were several structures in the Eternal City that stood out among the rest: the wharf, the lighthouse, the clock tower, but the palace was the largest of them all, sprawled across an entire island and set under the highest point of the invisible dome protecting the city from the crushing weight of water. Jet glanced at the dark spires looming in the distance, then shrugged. I'm willing to bet that the most important thing in this city is hidden there. The Dutchman is probably moving in that direction, as well. She lingered for a moment. So, what is the plan? Sonny contemplated for a while. Well, now that the night garden is being repaired, we have two main goals left. Secure the source of the storm god's lineage and find what I am looking for. The former is located in the lighthouse, while the latter, the palace, is a good bet. There's also the building that looks like an armory, as well as several other interesting landmarks. The problem is that they are situated in different directions. He smiled darkly. Another problem is that this city is populated by a vast horde of immortal great ones. In fact, the city is what makes them immortal. Ideally, we should conquer this entire place, but that does not seem like a realistic goal at the moment. Unless we find a way to destroy the sorcery making the city eternal, that is. Granted, the same sorcery seems to be preventing the storm sea from crushing it into dust, so there's that. Sonny shook his head. We should go for the lighthouse and the palace. If an opportunity to conquer the city presents itself in the process, we might consider it then. These are long-term goals, though. As for right now. Jet glanced at him and asked in a relaxed tone, survive? He nodded. Yes. At the moment, far more immortals than the ones we dealt with are moving toward us. And when they arrive, we might not be able to defeat them all. Jet smiled. We can't allow them to corner us on this island, right? If several swarms descend upon us here, even your shadow race won't be able to withstand the assault. We'll be buried under an avalanche of flesh. Sonny hated to admit it, but Jet was right. They had suffered numerous casualties while enjoying a great numerical advantage. Without it, even the Shadow Legion would struggle to win. Worse still, even if they repelled the second wave of immortals, there would be a third one, and the fourth, each more overwhelming than the previous one. The shades would not be truly destroyed, but if Sunny was not careful, all of them would be vanquished one after another, leaving him to face a city full of indestructible great nightmare creatures alone. So, what do you suggest? He had his own considerations, but not using Jet and her rich experience would be foolish. She lingered for a few seconds, then said in an even tone, "If we can't allow ourselves to be cornered, we must attack. Advance to the neighboring islands, stretch out the line of combat contact, and let our superior numbers shine." Sunny smiled. That was my thinking, as well. We should cross to the 3 islands connected to this one by bridges, find easily reinforced positions, and repel the second wave of immortals. He fell silent and closed his eyes for a moment. Things will get difficult from there, because we'll be nearing the inner ring of the city. Those 3 islands are connected to numerous more, and from different directions, as well, so we will be flanked while repelling frontal assaults. It is hard to predict what will happen exactly, though, because we don't know enough about the Eternal City yet. Jet nodded. Advance, conquer territory, establish reinforced positions, rinse and repeat. The lighthouse is similar to the wharf, though both are situated on the outskirts of the city while the palace is standing dead in the center. Which one are we going to go for first? Sunny grimaced. The lighthouse was easier to reach, since they could simply move along the outer perimeter of the Eternal City to get there. The palace, however, if the Dutchman was indeed carving a path to it, then they needed to arrive before the Wraith army. He remained silent for a while, then asked, "How long do you think the Night Garden will need to stay at the wharf to be repaired?" Jet hesitated. "I am not sure. We can set sail at any moment, though either to escape or to circle the city and make landfall at a different point." Sunny contemplated silently, feeling the pain of his flaw growing more and more intense. He still had not answered Jet's question, after all. Eventually, he said, "Then let's go after the lighthouse and the palace at the same time." He glanced at the distant spires of the palace somberly. The Shadow Legion will launch an invasion into the depths of the Eternal City, slowly making its way to the central island. The Night Garden, meanwhile, will sail along the edges of the dome and bring us directly to the lighthouse. Sunny glanced at Jet with a concerned determination. "If everything goes well, or rather, if we'll make it go well, we will launch a second offensive toward the palace, this time from the lighthouse. Then, we will see who gets to it first." Jet sighed. "Sounds like a plan. I have just one question, though." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "What?" She grinned. "Are you sure that we don't want to just get the hell out of here?" Sunny stared at her with an incredulous expression for a while. "Of course, we want to. Do you think that fighting immortal nightmare creatures on the bottom of the sea is how I want to spend my days? Did I not mention that I hate water? This chapter is updated by Novair.net. He grimaced. However, reality does not always cater to our wishes. So, let's wage a war on this cursed city and conquer it." Jet smiled lazily. "Let's. Oh, and by the way, yes." She patted Sunny on the shoulder. "I do think that, deep down, that is how you want to spend your days." Sunny scoffed. "Joke's on her. I'm not that deep." The gears of war were turning. In the northern reaches of the Eternal City, the Dutchman and its Wraith army were engaged in a fierce battle against the corrupted immortals, slowly pushing their way toward the palace. In the southernmost part of the city, the Shadow Legion had conquered a foothold and was now preparing to advance. Far in the east, the gargantuan clock tower oversaw the silent streets. In the west, the lighthouse shone with brilliant silver light. Sunny felt a sense of urgency as he commanded his shades to march north. This is not at all like the burned forest. His campaign to conquer the outskirts of the burned forest had been a slow affair. Fierce skirmishes had been followed by swift retreats and prolonged periods of relative peace. Sunny would dismiss the remaining shades and evade the pursuing black millipedes alone, waiting for his growing legion to restore itself and wage another battle. It had been like a dreadful game of cat and mouse. The battle for the Eternal City was going to be different. Soon enough, the Shadow Legion was going to clash with the fallen immortals once again, and once it did, there would be no pause and no reprieve from the daunting violence of war until it was all over, one way or another. That marathon battle was going to be far more strategic and involve far more moving parts, as well, so he expected to suffer unimaginable mental strain and truly put Mindweave to the test, exploring its very limits. Sunny did not feel wary or apprehensive, though. He did not feel particularly excited or on edge either. Instead, he was calm and collected, full of focus and grounded determination. After all, war was nothing new to him after all these years. Time is running out. At the moment, his 5 incarnations had split up, and so did the Shadow Legion. There were 3 islands bordering the one connected to the wharf. Therefore, one of his incarnations was retreating back to the Night Garden with Jet. They were going to sail along the edges of the Eternal City and make landfall directly at the lighthouse. The second incarnation was augmenting the puppeteer atop the Dark Castle, and the remaining 3 were accompanying different contingents of the Shadow Legion, each moving toward one of the island bridges. The first contingent was led by Saint, who was supported by Fiend. The third contingent was led by Slayer, with Serpent keeping her company. The second contingent was a bit special, since that one was the smallest and led directly by Sunny and the puppeteer Moth. This is going to be interesting. Sunny's consciousness split between the countless shades of his legions, spread across 3 advancing forces, with the puppeteer serving as the focal point of the entire army. Intangible strings of black silk spread in the sky above the Eternal City, visible only to Sunny. The Saint army reached the edge of the island first. Out there, the ornate buildings receded, opening to a vast emptiness. Far below, raging currents crashed into the basalt foundation of the city, foaming as they rushed with awful speed. A wide bridge arched as it spanned 6 kilometers that separated the 2 islands, and on the other side, the fallen immortals were already moving between buildings. Sunny observed the vast chasm and the dark water seething at its bottom, wondering if the Eternal City had always been separated into islands or if it had shattered while plummeting from the black skies to the bottom of the sea. In any case, falling down seemed like a bad idea. It was not that creatures of the caliber present in the Eternal City would be severely damaged in the fall or had no ways of climbing back up, but rather the fact that the elevation difference would give their enemies a fatal advantage. More than that, he could vaguely sense movement in the water. There had to be some kind of abominable beings dwelling at the bottom of the Eternal City, and from the looks of it, they were different from the corrupted immortals. The beautiful youths seemed to be wary of the edges of the islands, at least, which made him feel reluctant to dive into the dark waters himself. How curious. What could these immortal fiends fear? Sunny hoped to never find out. In any case, that did not matter at the moment. The shape of the bridge itself dictated the nature of the battle. Since it was arched, the side that controlled its crest would possess a minor advantage. It would face the enemy from an elevated position, while the enemy would have to fight on an upward slope. So, Saint and her soldiers had to occupy the crest as soon as possible. Novelfire.net. That could be accomplished easily enough. As the first of the immortals rushed across the bridge, the massive figure of Fiend dove into the shadows. Usually, using Shadow Step was a swift ordeal. All one had to do was enter the shadows and step out of them. However, due to Fiend's prodigious size, the simple act of submerging his towering body into the embrace of shadows took some time. He still rose from the shadows on the crest of the bridge before the immortals, though. The infernal colossus of blackened steel met them with a torrent of flames, incinerating their horrid bodies. By the time they were revived, Saints and her shades had already caught up to him, building an orderly formation and advancing at a steady march. At the forefront of the Saint army were the shadows of Godgrave and a large number of monstrous millipedes, their long bodies encased in impenetrable black chitin. Once Saint took control of the crest of the wide bridge, the strategy of her army became simple. She built an indestructible bulwark and allowed the enemies to crush themselves against it. Saint stood in front of her soldiers, clad in fearsome jade armor and wielding her usual round shield. Fiend was beside her, as well, with his indestructible steel body. Behind them was a wall of black chitin, with the monstrous shadows of Godgrave serving as the fangs of the largely defensive formation. Saints regarded the approaching immortals with her usual air of indifference, and then struck the rim of her shield twice. Fiend let out a thunderous roar, and behind him, countless millipedes clicked their mandibles, causing a loud rumbling to roll across the bridge. In the next moment, an avalanche of abhorrent flesh collided against the formation of Saint's army, and all hell broke loose. At the same time as the Saint army entered the battle for the western bridge, the Slayer army reached the eastern span of the chasm. Here, the landscape was rather similar, except for the fact that the Great Bridge was flat as opposed to arched and not quite as wide. The battle was very different, though. As the torrent of fallen immortals entered the bridge, rushing across its surface like a harrowing tide, a cold wind blew across the chasm. Then, something glistened in the air. It was a snowflake, one at first, then one more, then an endless number of them. In a strange tum of events, on that day, snow fell at the bottom of the storm sea. The winds howled, reaching a frightening speed and intensity, and a violent blizzard enveloped the world in its frigid embrace. The temperature plummeted, and the milky white veil of snow obscured everything in sight. The snowstorm, of course, was summoned by the shadow of the winter beast. Somewhat weakened, but largely indifferent to the hurricane winds and the lethal cold, the fallen immortals continued moving forward. One of them had almost reached the middle points of the bridge when a black arrow suddenly fell from above, pinning him to the stone. The fiend struggled to break free, tearing his ghastly flesh in the process. A moment later, another arrow appeared noiselessly from the snow, severing his body in half. And then, as other fallen immortals overtook the bleeding body, massive silhouettes suddenly dove at them from the snow. Those were the shadow wolves, tearing the abhorrent abominations apart with their enormous maws. Drowned by the howling of the wind, a quiet rustle followed them. Soon enough, the figures of the obsidian wasps rushed between the giant wolves, joining the massacre. And then, finally, eerily beautiful ember patterns ignited in the veil of snow, stretching high into the air. They heralded the arrival of the Ember Queen. Slayer was standing on her enormous head, already knocking another arrow, and a great tide of the black millipedes flowed past her to join the fight. Among them was another millipede queen, this one seemingly forged from glistening onyx. It was Serpent, who had assumed that form for the moment. The dark surface of the bridge was swiftly covered by snow, and the snow was swiftly painted red by the blood of the hideous immortals. But that was not all. Unseen in the blizzard, two currents of shadows extended on both sides of the bridge, spanning its length. Soon, they solidified into glistening obsidian, becoming bridges of their own. Their smooth surface was immediately hidden by the segmented carapaces of numerous millipedes, who were rushing forward to attack the fallen immortals from the flanks. Saint commanded the forces of the Shadow Legion in the west, while Slayer commanded them in the east. That only left the middle bridge. The scene taking place there was no less stunning, albeit far more bizarre. This content belongs to novelfire.net. Out there, in front of the bridge, the ornate buildings collapsed, raising a vast cloud of dust. And in that dust, a strange, colossal silhouette revealed itself, moving slowly toward the chasm. Soon, the gargantuan figure reached the bridge, revealing itself to be a towering, imposing dark castle. The castle moved across the rubble on 8 towering segmented legs, akin to a gargantuan spider. A titanic moth was perched on its tallest tower, and countless strands of black silk extended from it east and west, bloating out the sky of the eternal city like an ethereal spider web. That was the marvelous Mimic, of course. Both Mimic and the Puppeteer were currently augmented by one avatar of Sunny, and every shade of the Shadow Legion capable of ranged attacks was currently manning the castle's walls. The shadows of Dayron and the human saints were there, as well, while Goliath, the defiled seeker of truth, and the remnant of the Jade Queen were escorting it. The dark castle stepped onto the great bridge, instantly blocking its entire width, and continued moving forward. Soon enough, the defenders of its walls unleashed a devastating barrage of ranged attacks on the attacking immortals, reducing them to tom shreds of slithering flesh. 3 battles raged at the same time, and on each of the 3 bridges, the forces of the Shadow Legion were slowly advancing. There was a 4th battle happening at the same time, as well, hidden from view. Out there in the throne room of the dark castle, a deep shadow rested beneath the obsidian throne. It was Nightmare, having returned to its shapeless form. At the moment, the fallen immortals infected by his dream curse were locked in the maze of nightmares, shattering them one after another. At the same time, the seeds nightmare had planted in them were growing, giving birth to new terrifying dreams. The tenebrous steed had to not only keep his prey contained within the maze and spread the dream curse to those of the immortals who were still awake, but also battle and subjugate each of the newborn nightmares and do so faster than his prior minions were being destroyed, as well. The fury of that terrible battle was in no way inferior to what was happening in reality, and maybe even more dreadful. Gods. Sunny and Jet had just reached the wharf by then. Standing on its walls, they looked back at the beautiful vista of the Eternal City. Jet took a deep breath. It was hard to see the details of the 3 battles from where they were standing, but what little they could see was already unimaginable enough. She remained silent for a few moments, then sighed. Why do I feel like I'm missing all the fun? Hearing her own words, Jet shook her head. Damn. We haven't known each other that long, but I already feel as if I've spent too much time with you. Sunny grinned. He opened his mouth, wanting to answer, but at that moment, a distant rumble distracted them both. Looking east, they saw something stunning out there. Far away, the colossal shape of the clock tower was crumbling. The immense structure was breaking apart and folding in on itself, enormous chunks of stone falling down in clouds of dust and debris. The scale of this destruction was simply daunting. Sunny frowned. His own forces were nowhere near the western reaches of the Eternal City, and the Dutchman was far in the north. That only left the mysterious third contender. That thing, whatever it was, must have caused this scene. His frown deepened. Because fun things are happening. Turning away, Sunny headed toward the night garden. Let's go. There's no time to waste. The beauty and tranquility of the blooming wharf were in stark contrast with the horrid carnage of the battle taking place on the other side of the island, especially for Sunny, whose consciousness was split between both. Walking to the inner edge of the wall with determined steps, he jumped off, plummeted about 100 meters, and landed softly on the bow of the night garden. Neve was standing guard there, listening to the distant clamor of the devastating battle with a grim expression. Sunny's arrival seemed to alleviate some of his worry, and when Jet joined them, most of his tension disappeared. Glancing at the walls of the wharf, Neve exhaled slowly. What the hell is happening there? Sunny gave him a brief look. A dead army is battling an immortal army. It's quite hideous. With that, he looked around and asked, a better question is what's happening here? This wharf was supposed to repair the night garden, how is that going? Neve hesitated for a moment. Ether would be able to answer better, since he is in the runic hall, but in short, Nightwalker was right. The night garden is indeed being mended, although we are not quite sure what it means just yet. Sunny had already been reasonably confident of that fact, but it was good to receive a confirmation. As Jet studied her ship with curiosity, he asked, so, how long do you think it will take? Neve raised an eyebrow. Probably quite some time. Days, maybe weeks. Why? Sunny grimaced. Because we were hoping to take the night garden on a small voyage. The situation in the city is difficult, so having it at our disposal would be of great help. It was truly a blessing that the living ship was safe from the horrid abominations populating the Eternal City, already. If not for Dayron and his runic array. Sunny shuddered to imagine what would have happened once they drew close to the sunken ruin. There was a good reason why the Serpent King had not only built a barrier around the city, but also left a warning to anyone wishing to explore it. Jet smiled. By difficult, he means that there's a myriad of abominable immortals, the Dutchman and its army of wraiths, and also something else entirely, which might be even more dreadful. The Lord of Shadows has unleashed his legion, and there are 3 battles between great and supreme beings happening at the same time. Oh, and that is just the beginning of the end of this expedition. She sighed. We want to take the night garden directly to the lighthouse, though, where the lineage of the storm god is hidden. So, can it sail? And more importantly, should we interrupt the mending process? Neve studied them both silently for a short while, then nodded. TT can sail, and it doesn't matter whether we do or not. It was Sunny's turn to be surprised. It doesn't matter? Neve nodded calmly. You must keep in mind that the Night Garden is not a mundane ship. It is not merely an enchanted ship either, instead, it is a living ship. So, the reality of how it is being repaired is different from how we would usually imagine it. He pointed at the deck beneath their feet. The wharf is not literally repairing its broken parts, like one would a mundane vessel. Rather, it is as if the wharf infused the Night Garden with a great torrent of vitality. That vitality, in turn, fueled the ability of the Night Garden to mend itself much like a living being would heal naturally. So although we say that it is being repaired, in truth it is more like it's healing. He shrugged. His chapter is dated by novelfire.net, so it doesn't matter that much if we stay docked or not. The process has already been initiated, so it will continue even if the Night Garden leaves the wharf. Sunny looked at him for a while, then looked at Jet. Then, he smiled. That's what I want to hear. The process of healing would probably reach its conclusion faster if the Night Garden remained in the blossoming birth, but it could continue unseen even if the living ship dove back into the crushing darkness of the storm sea. This was truly great news, not only because it allowed Sunny to use the living ship in the battle for the Eternal City, but also because it gave them an opportunity to retreat without worry. Even if other goals of the expedition ended up not being achieved, the Night Garden would benefit. So, Sunny did not have to feel too worried anymore. Let us cast off, then. He looked at them with a smile, hesitated for a moment, and then added in a nonchalant tone, how do we do that, by the way? As it turned out, leaving the berth was just as easy as entering it. The Night Garden was currently connected to the wharf by the branches that supported its weight. Its hull and the berth had become a single hull, and therefore, the sorcery of the living ship expanded to contain the sorcery empowering the Titanic wharf, as well. So, the person controlling the Night Garden could control the wharf, too. Granted, there was no instruction manual on how to do it. Nevertheless, Ether had been able to learn how to activate the simplest functions after a short period of experimentation. Soon enough, Sunny heard the sound of rushing water, and saw great waterfalls spilling into the vast reservoir of the berth. The water level rose slowly, and as it did, the wharf slowly retracted its branches one by one, separating itself from the living ship. Finally, the great gates of the colossal wharf opened, and the dark expanse of water revealed itself once more. The Night Garden slowly glided out of the berth and reached the edges of the dome protecting the Eternal City. Then, turning its bow, it took course toward the lighthouse. The Battle of the Three Bridges had started from a stunning explosion of violence, and as it progressed, the carnage only grew more dreadful. Facing the fallen immortals of the Eternal City, Sunny felt as if he was finally experiencing what it was like to face him and his Shadow Legion. Needless to say, that made him quite uncomfortable. It did not matter, really, how powerful his shades were or how finely he controlled their movements. The personal skill and valor of his shadows did not matter either. No matter how well they fought and how many enemies they killed, the fallen immortals inevitably returned to life and dove back into combat, their hideous flesh bulging with lethal tendrils and morphing into terrible maws. The shades themselves could not be destroyed, but it took them much longer to return to the battlefield after being vanquished. So, time was not on Sunny's side. With a subtle shudder, he fully realized that his eventual defeat was inevitable. Sooner or later, the citizens of the Eternal City would completely obliterate the Shadow Legion and consume him. There was simply no escape. If he played by the rules, of course, which Sunny had no intention of doing. Why follow the rules and lose when he could cheat and win? It's still a little disturbing, though. His own intent and ability to deal with the immortal prisoners of the Eternal City were a stark reminder that Sunny was not invincible, either. His shades were indestructible, true, but only until he met a being disinclined to follow the rules, as well. Read full story at n0v3l.fire.net. Immortality is really a curse. Or at least it could become one. On each of the three bridges, his shades were trying to achieve the same result through different means. Saints and her soldiers had built an impregnable wall and steadily weathered the flood of hungry flesh. Slayer and her beasts hunted down the enemies in the snow, while the defenders of the Dark Castle unleashed a storm of ranged attacks on the ghastly abominations, but their end goal was the same: minimize their losses and gradually restrain the enemy until the dream curse takes hold. Defense, offense, and a combination of both. On the western bridge, the black millipedes had flanked the fallen immortals, who were now caught between them and Slayer's main force. The murderous Shadow herself had spent her quiver of powerful enchanted arrows and leaped into battle, assuming the form of a bizarre beast whose colossal body and long tail were covered by impenetrable scales, and who could tum into an armored ball. The scales turned out to be all but indestructible. The tendrils of the fallen immortals, at least, failed to pierce them, while the immortals themselves were easily crushed by the rolling beast or torn apart by its sharp claws after it unfurled its giant body. Serpent moved in their midst, as well, shifting between various forms. On the middle bridge, the Dark Castle was steadily moving forward. Mimic was merely a transcendent shadow, but it was currently augmented by one of Sunny's incarnations, so its walls had tuned durable enough to withstand the glancing attacks of the fallen immortals, even if just barely. Most of the abominations were torn to shreds by the ranged attacks of the defenders before reaching the castle, but in the end, many of them inevitably began to scale the walls. Reaching the battlements, they were met by the shadows of Dayron and the human saints, cut down, and swallowed by black chains. In front of the marching castle, on the bridge, the defiled Seeker of Truth expelled clouds of deadly miasma, the remnant of the Jade Queen breathed out torrents of caustic volcanic ash, while Goliath gazed upon the rushing abominations, washing everything it beheld in immolating heat. On the eastern bridge, a wall of black chitin was refusing to buckle under an avalanche of hungry flesh. The azures of condemnation and the bestial horrors of Godrave advanced through the breaches in the phalanx of monstrous millipedes, crushing and severing the bodies of the fallen immortals. Fiend rampaged in front of the defensive formation, serving as its vanguard. Saints herself, meanwhile, had carved a bloody path to advance forward. Surrounded by grotesque horrors of the Eternal City from all sides, she calmly activated the Shield of Nothing and descended upon the abominable creatures, moving under a veil of true darkness. Sunny and the puppeteer controlled all three armies, tensely observing the changing currents of the battle. This is a problem. The fallen immortals were powerful, and there were a lot of them. Not all of these abominations had been humans once, either there were bestial horrors among them, as well, each like a moving abyss of abhorrent, murderous flesh. However, Sunny had managed to bridge the divide between the Shadow Legion and the dwellers of the Eternal City with skill, strategy, and cohesion of his silent troops. The problem, however, was in the nature of this battle. Killing the enemies only slowed them down a little, and to truly deal with them, they had to be restrained and eventually infected by the dream curse. But while temporarily destroying the body of a fallen immortal was a task that an individual shade could accomplish, restraining them required continuous efforts of at least a couple of shades. Which meant that with each adversary Sunny neutralized, the number of his soldiers diminished even if none of them were vanquished. Something had to change. And soon, it did. Just as Saint was finally forced to move back on the eastern bridge, a powerful explosion rocked it, and dozens of immortals in front of her were torn to pieces. A moment later, another explosion bloomed, and a powerful shockwave sent the enemy reeling. That was the Night Garden, sailing at the edge of the invisible barrier that protected the Eternal City while circling it from the east. As they left the wharf and passed the island, a perfect view of the eastern bridge and the battle happening on it opened to the right of the living ship. Which meant that its starboard cannons had a direct line of fire, and could unleash a devastating bombardment on the attacking immortals. There were no firing crews and ascended officers on deck to fuel the cannons with essence and load them, though. So, instead, Sunny loaded and aimed the cannons himself, summoning countless black hands from the shadows, then charged the cannon balls with his own supreme essence. As a series of explosions erased swathes of the advancing abominations from the Great Bridge, Saint and her army advanced swiftly.